Welcome to PoMoArts. Tonight we are streaming live for a virtual artist talk and tour with Connor MacKinnon for his exhibition, A Fragmented History, Port Moody. I'm Janice Cotter, Gallery Manager. As we begin the evening, I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered on the shared, unceded, ancestral, and traditional lands of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Tsleil-Waututh, Coquitlam, Squamish, Musqueam, Katzie, Kikite, and Stolo nations. As a small first step in the process of reconciliation, we make this acknowledgement to recognize, honor, and offer our gratitude for their connection to and care for these lands, mountains, and waters. Our presence here is the result of a colonial legacy that is still unfolding in harmful ways. A land acknowledgement is just one step towards a larger effort at reconciliation. As we gather virtually in Port Moody Old City Hall, our very own local colonial seat of power, to celebrate and make art, we think it's the perfect opportunity to deeply reflect. We invite you to join us in carrying forward these reflections into meaningful reconciliation efforts and to hold us accountable for doing the same. Now, I'd like to thank our board of directors and our longtime supporters, the City of Port Moody, the Province of British Columbia for their support through the Community Gaming Program, the Government of Canada for their support through the Canada Summer Jobs Program. Thank you very much for joining us. It's hard to believe that we started doing virtual artist talks more than 2 years ago. And having you join us for all of these online events has definitely been one of the silver linings of the pandemic. This evening, Connor MacKinnon is joining us from his home on Vancouver Island. And he is the recipient of one of our 2022 Quiam Choi exhibition scholarships and created the body of work in A Fragmented History, Port Moody. Connor is a sculpture artist who moved from London, Ontario, and he is completing his Masters of Fine Art at the University of Victoria. He received his Bachelor's of Fine Art from the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design and an advanced diploma in fine arts from Fanshawe College. With the aim of producing observations as tangible things, Connor's work explores the physical and conceptual reconstruction of fragmented histories and historical objects through the use of generative, algorithmic 3D modeling and the speculative lens of historical fiction. I'd like you to welcome Connor MacKinnon. How are you doing tonight, Connor?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, excited to be able to share the work and kind of some of the processes that went into this work, because that's like a lot of the joy for me is developing the projects and kind of problem solving and figuring out what ways of making and developing these projects. So I'm excited to share all of that.
Oh, that's great. Well, when the show opened, you were kind enough to let us record a video of you giving a tour of the work in the exhibition. And so I will play the video of the tour at this time. And then afterwards, Connor has a more detailed information for his process in creating the works. And we'll look at that. And you can post your questions, comments, anything you want Connor to know about in the Facebook chat, and we'll get to them after the talk. So at this moment, I will share the screen. It'll take me a second here to do the video share screen.
So I'm MacKinnon, one of the 2022 QM Choi Exhibition Scholarship recipients. My exhibition, A Fragmented History, Port Moody, is all about reconstructing fragments of Port Moody's history. Through my research, I've found that Port Moody's history is no more fragmented than any other community. But it's all about exploring what history there is and what history is missing, and being flexible with that history, allowing imagination, potential, variability, multiplicity to come into that reconstruction of this history, and allowing it to become something more than just something you might find in the textbooks. So here I'll give you a little tour of the exhibition, talk about kind of some of the concepts behind the works, where the fragments have come from, and the processes that I've translated these works through. So when I started this project, I was looking for different sites that I could source fragmented artifacts from. And so one of the big ones I found was the MacKinnon Mill ruins across the inlet from Port Moody. Originally I thought, I'd be able to find something there that I could reconstruct. So in my research of this site, I found that I was spending a lot of time on the 3D viewer on Google Earth. It allowed me to move around the site and explore it from different angles, and seeing some of the ruins of the concrete structures and the wood pilings. And through this kind of exploration of the site online, I found it to be kind of a reconstruction as well, right? It's an approximation. From my understanding, they use planes to fly over the site in different directions, and then they feed this information, these photos, back into a program that builds a 3D model. So when you're navigating around, that's that 3D model that you're seeing. And so instead of trying to reconstruct this site, I wanted to explore how much of a reconstruction that already was. And this became especially clear when I came to Port Moody, and I was exploring around on the shore there, and things that it felt so different, right? Like a space like this object here is online in the space, in that 3D space. It's so like apparent, right? This orange slice looking form, but on the seashore, it's just a rectangle because it's out in the water from a distance. It doesn't convey the same information, and so that kind of understanding of place, of not knowing a place, I felt similar to the idea of the othering of time. The title of this work, The Othering of Time and Place, comes from the idea that historical time is inaccessible to us in a way. And when we reconstruct that history, we have to understand that reconstruction as an approximation. My working on this project from understanding Port Moody's history, while not being from here and visiting once, my understanding of this place is one of a visitor. It's not of a someone who is intimate with this space. In the same way that when we reconstruct historical time, we are almost like visitors. It's kind of like in the same way that I can't understand someone else's thoughts or actions. We can't understand the thoughts or actions of people in the past, even more so than I think than those in our contemporary time. So the process for this work really came from that Google Earth 3D data. I went in and extracted those 3D models of the site, and I was able to choose little pieces that I wanted to then recreate. And how I went about choosing those pieces was from Google Maps, and the user submitted photos of people who had visited this site. Most of them seemed to be tourists, which I felt kind of similar to my own feeling of the place. And so with a work like with this one here, they were right up on top of this structure. They were very close to it. So that's the only thing that's available in this kind of snapshot. Where in this case, everything's a much smaller scale. And that's because they took this photo from really far away. So I tried to capture what they would have been seeing from the places that they took those photos from. So after creating these 3D models, the process that I went through to create these kind of physical objects here is I used a CNC mill. So this is cedar wood in a way to kind of pay homage or mimic the cedar shingles that the mill would have originally created. So that CNC mill, it's like a drill bit that's cutting through the wood that I can control and tell to cut in a very specific pattern. So with an object like this here, it comes across and then moves up and moves down, and that's all controlled by the computer. And I just kind of have to create that tool path. So this work, titled 1082-143-002, comes from the accession number or the collection number from these two objects that I found from the collection from the Port Moody Station Museum. I spent 2 really great days digging through the collection, and I found these 2 objects. They were in different parts of the collection, but they had the same number on them that told me that they were connected. Even though one was this broken piece of metal and this other one was this handle on its own, that number told me that these things went together somehow. So after I found these objects in the collection, I took a whole series of photos and precise measurements to bring home for when I reconstructed the 3D models of these objects. At that point, I put them into a 3D modeling program and had them positioned in space for me to start reconstructing the model. So the reconstruction isn't one to try to replicate what this object would have been originally. Number one, I don't know what it was. And number 2, this project is all about kind of the imagination. So from those objects and a series of photos of other early machinery, I found a great resource from the BC forestry that had a whole bunch of equipment from 1908. That was a big inspiration for a lot of these forms and the gears and just different things to kind of help continue building this beyond those 2 fragments that I had. So from those 2 pieces, this became one of them here. I was looking at kind of the angles on it, and I found that it would fit really well as almost like a stamp. So I built another form here that would kind of accept it. And the other object was that handle, this kind of knob, which I thought would be great to kind of maneuver some of this equipment to position the gears, things like that. I don't really know exactly what this machine is or does, but I found that between this stamping action and some of the other things that were in the collection that inspired me, I thought maybe it stamps leather or sheet metal. So that started to inspire some of the other parts of the machine. So the creation of this project was a big mix between the old and the new. I'm trying to create something that looks and feels old, but using very modern equipment, such as 3D printing and a CNC milling machine. So parts like this, these are 3D printed, this one here, these at the back, most of this stuff in the middle, and so it's all made of plastic. These 2 bigger frames here, those are carved out of wood using that CNC machine. And what's really nice about that, there's kind of a little poetry and like a nod to the historical way that this would have been made. In the way that the CNC mill can only, it's a cutting head that moves around, it can go up and down, in the same way that these would have been cast originally from a two-part mold. So there's one on top and one on the bottom. There can't be any undercuts. So the process also instructs the form. And it kind of works in the other way, in that the form that I'm making to replicate that methodology then is suitable to this new way of making that I'm using. So when I started this whole exhibition, the first thing I did was I went to the library, and I was pleasantly surprised to find 3 books about Port Moody's history. The one that was the most intriguing to me was D.M. Norton's The Early History of Port Moody, which covered exactly that. A particular passage that really jumped out to me was kind of just a few sentences talking about the blacksmith, because they didn't know anything about them. They didn't even know their name. This passage stood out to me because there was so much information about all of the other first settlers in this town. And that fragment, that little piece of unknown knowledge, really jumped out as a potential place for a reconstruction. So as the blacksmith kind of became the center of this reconstruction, I chose to use the head of a blacksmithing hammer as kind of the point that it all focused around. And as I wasn't reconstructing from an actual historical hammer itself, I was, reconstructing this fragment from a book, I chose to use my own collection of hammers as a source. So this collection of hammers became the input to develop a 3D generative algorithm. So what this algorithm does is it allows me to change, using sliders, change this hammer form that in some cases is a square end hammer that goes down into a cross, or it's a circular hammer, big on one end, little on the other. And so these sliders, these adjustments, these parameters allow me to have a single kind of model that could be all of these hammers. So after I made this algorithm, I then wanted to apply some historical information back into it. So instead of using those sliders to change the width or length or diameter, instead I used the names of blacksmiths that I sourced from 1860s directories. So these were names of blacksmiths from all over BC that, in this case here, these all 3 of these hammers represent different Williams. So all of their first name is William, so all the one side of the hammers are William. Over here, we have 3 other hammers that they all have the same kind of end on them as well. And that's because it was a family, the Fletcher family. So it was John, James, and Charles. And each of the fronts are a little different because the first names are different. So 32 of these 33 hammers are those kind of historical blacksmiths that I wanted to reference. And the last here, the 33rd, is the kind of the representation, the fictional blacksmith that I've invented for Port Moody. So this is the form that name created. So thank you very much to PoMoArts for the opportunity to create and exhibit this work. My exhibition will be running from May 12th to June 9th, and I hope you come check it out.
Wow, that was great, Connor. Having you in the gallery space to explain everything really makes a wonderful difference in people being able to visualize the process.
Yeah, it's great. It feels nice. It's like someone else doing the artist talk for me tonight.
Well, now we will let you get on with the process portion that you've done, and I'll just back out of here and let you do the share screen on your end and get on with it then.
Okay, great. So yeah, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the processes that I went through, and to give a few visualizations to some of the content that I was talking about in that little video tour. So I'll just kind of jump right into it. So with this first work that I guess I kind of talked about last there in the video, DM Norton's Blacksmith. As I mentioned, to develop these kind of hammerhead forms, I created a generative algorithm. And so that can be a little bit deceiving when I say that, because I wasn't, it's not like I went in with like a programming language and coded these things kind of individual. I do make use of a program which kind of assists with this process. And for me, who's someone, you know, who thinks visually, who thinks in 3 dimensions, it allows me to build this system live. And this is kind of a very zoomed out representation of it. In a moment here, I'll jump into this and we can zoom in and look at some of the components separately. But just to kind of a basic overview, this software, it's called, Rhino 3D is kind of the mother software, and then the specific algorithm building software is called Grasshopper. And yeah, so just as a kind of an overview, information flows from left to right. So over here, this information is starting with that name. In this case, it's meant to, I can input one of the those historical blacksmiths. Their first name goes in here, their last name goes in here, and then that information is kind of broken down and turned into different parameters that, as I mentioned before, can start adjusting different inputs, such as the diameter, the shape, the length, all sorts of things like that. So why don't I just jump out of the presentation and I'll go kind of right into the software here. So this is kind of the view that I, while I'm working on it, this is what I see. There's kind of this 3D viewer here. So these are all of the 3D models of kind of the pre-built hammers that I then 3D printed as the objects that you'd see in the exhibition. And this kind of red kind of ghosted form here is the well, I guess it's the live model. So as I adjust the parameters in here, this will kind of automatically change alongside it here. So just as an example here, let me put my name in, so I can spell it right. And so right away, this front end of the hammer has changed, and we'll just do it for the back as well and see what happens there. Okay, so this is the kind of hammer representation if I inputted my name into there. So I'll just go through. I won't go into too much depth on kind of all of the steps, but I'll just give you a quick explanation of how this information changes. Because one of the things that kind of developed out of this work is kind of an understanding of the use of historical information, right? So when is it being manipulated? When is it being used properly, efficiently? There's just a lot of processing that goes into, you know, sourcing this kind of primary historical data, and then what we have as kind of the narrative of this history that we're understanding. And in this case, I don't think it's kind of a dangerous thing I'm doing in the manipulation of this data, in that it is so extreme, right? I'm converting the names to hammers. But I think there's kind of subtle ways in which information could be manipulated that could, that could present false senses and things like that. But let me get into the steps of breaking it down here. So from here, that name, you can see here, it gets broken down into just the letters, which then get kind of turned into numbers. And from here, you can see that information's flowing around here. I'll zoom out a little bit. And here it gets broken down into each of the parameters. So as I mentioned before, while I was building this, I made use of these sliders, and that to make this definition or algorithm robust enough to fit all of my example hammers. So if I just kind of bring this in here instead, I can start adjusting things. And okay, so we can see here, that's adjusting the placement of the face of that one hammer. But you can see it's a little bit glitchy, as I must have changed that piece a little bit here. So we'll go back into there. So each of these kind of items here, they are controlling a different parameter. So if we switch this one, let's just see here. Okay, so that's the width or the scaling of that front end of the hammer. Let's just go back there. So if we zoom out, I won't go through all of this information here, but what's happening is it's being constructed, it's building these kind of in-between zones, meeting up with this middle piece, and then putting it all together, kind of, and this is that final object. So from here, it's kind of a simple move of baking it, is the term. Oops. Stop the share there. You bake it, and now I have this model here that I can then send off to the 3D printer to produce these things physically. So let me jump back into my presentation here. So this is just a quick example. The final objects, I like to build to make use of this kind of filler primer, this iron oxide color that for me speaks of kind of like a archetypal unfinishedness, right? These forms that I'm creating, they aren't hammerheads, they're not metal, they're not hammers, but they're forms. So that red color in the final product kind of represents that for me. But while I'm printing, I can make use of whatever color plastic filament. So that's just a few of the hammers there. So this next work, I did go into more detail about this one in the talk, but I can show you a few visuals of the development of this work as well. So let me jump out of the presentation again, and I'm just going to go to Google Earth to kind of show you what I've spent so much time looking at here. I've spent many hours exploring this site, looking at all of the tiny little details of this place. More time in this digital space than I did on site in person, and I just found it amazing how different some of these things were. As I mentioned, this form in particular, in kind of 3D from above, it's so kind of distinctive. But then when you view it from kind of a distance, all you can see from the shore is this kind of rectangular structure. You might not even know that it is kind of circular or octagonal. And just for a little bit of information for you, this kind of structure originally was for a kiln burner. And so I guess I didn't mention that before either, is this whole site was they made cedar shingles for roofing. So they built it off off the land into the inlet here. So if it did light on fire, it wouldn't burn the whole town down. And of course, it did burn down. So these are just the ruins of that site. So that kiln would have been producing the heat to dry the cedar shingles before they're used. So I recommend going on Google Earth and exploring kind of this site or other sites. I find it really fun. Not all places have this 3D data, but this is one that does happen. Okay, let me jump back in here. Okay, so the other thing I mentioned in that presentation was these user submitted photos. So these are just the kind of 4 of the 9 that I used. It's interesting, these are all kind of, very beautiful weather. Both times that I was in Port Moody and able to spend some time at this site, it was pouring down rain. So it's interesting kind of the different bias and the different understanding that I have of this site. But this one is a really good example here of it being so close. And when I chose where that model that I was going to make use of was, I wanted to zoom in right onto this structure, which is this one here actually. So it's quite distinctive, where some of the other ones which have these smaller characteristics are a little bit more zoomed out. And a lot of those bumps, they're actually these wooden pilings, which are quite, distinctly cylinder or square in person, but on that Google photogrammetry reconstruction, that 3D model, they're just kind of bumps. So it's those things that, what information is being lost, what information is being kind of carried forward that got me excited to explore not just this site, but the reconstruction of this site, I guess. So this is just an example of after I extracted that 3D data. Google Earth does not make it easy for you to extract the 3D data, but it is possible if you dig for it. I'll just leave it at that. But so these are just kind of some of the examples of those models before I sent them to the CNC. And as I was mentioning again in that talk, to translate the model into that kind of the CNC mill, that cutter head, it needs a kind of a tool path to follow around. So in this case, these blue lines all represent lines for that cutter to move along. So back and forth, and then it gets to something a little bit more exciting. Then it goes up, goes down, moves up at an angle, and it just slowly cuts away. I have here it is. I have this little CNC mill of my own, and it's small and it's slow, but it does do a good job, and it gets through the work. But a lot of the time, I was able to kind of work on other things while it was running, because most of them took between 4 to 6 hours to cut all the details into them. So here are a few more shots of that. Here's some close-ups. So as you can see, the cutting blades there, the bits, they go down very small for most of the detail that's being cut into these. The tip of that bit is kind of 1/2 millimeter in diameter. So it takes a lot of passes to cut through. And then here is this last work that I kind of, this is the official accession number for those objects from the collection, but the name that I've kind of developed not developed, but I end up calling it is just my machine, in that it's a little ambiguous in what it does. So these 2 objects here, which were kind of my inspiration, and the ones that you'll see in the gallery, those are just replicas that I've created. They're 3D printed like most of this machine, but here are a few images of the actual objects from the museum. And a big thank you to the Port Moody Station Museum for the welcoming and assistance. I had 2 really great days in the collection, just digging through full access, photographing and measuring all of these things precisely, so I could then recreate them afterwards. So here you can see that part of the accession number there. And it was amazing that these 2 objects were in kind of completely different areas of the museum, or of the collection, I should say. And I gravitated towards both of them. That handle, because it's a handle of something much larger, and then this piece, which was broken off, and it just speaks to an exciting kind of history. And then they ended up being part of the same collection, and I can only assume originally part of the same machine. So here's just a view, just a screen grab of that 3D model. So all of these kind of black and white, or these gray parts, those are all the 3D printed parts. Oh, that little piece should be gray as well. And then these larger frames here, those are also CNC milled. And I think I've got a photo of that coming up as well. Yeah, here we go. So out of a big sheet of MDF, it kind of cuts out kind of the mass of it, and then it comes back and slowly moves over to cut all of kind of the finer details. So I think that's kind of all of the visuals I have here. So I hope between that and kind of the previous video tour, it kind of communicates the work, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Sorry, Connor, it took me a second to get everything turned back on.
No problem.
I have questions for you. I'm going to start with my gallery assistant, Emily's question. She has said, do you believe that building of digital maps into cedar or wood is evocative of how humans and contemporary society are attempting to rebuild, authenticate, or claim ownership of the land? Would you consider exploring the possibilities of fragmented histories within the land or non-humans, i.e. plants, animals, etc.?
I think there's a few bits in there. For that last bit there, the plants and animals or other entities, I think it's very much possible. And thinking about reconstruction, like one of the great examples that I use when I'm talking about my work often is kind of dinosaurs, and kind of the medieval kind of reconstructions of what they thought dinosaurs were looking like. Crocodiles with long legs, things like that. And then up to the most kind of recent kind of scientific reconstructions based on the anatomy of the pores inside kind of nasal structure that signals kind of that they would have feathers, not scales. How, when I was a kid, dinosaurs had scales, now they got feathers, I guess, right? So that I do find that exciting, and that kind of inspirational for what I'm applying to my work. But for me, I think I'm really interested in material culture, what people make. As I'm a maker myself, right? I get, as I mentioned at the beginning, I get really excited about the processes of how things are made. So that's kind of really the big drive of where I kind of get excited, and I guess that ends up being where my work is also kind of situated.
Okay. Actually, before I go to the next question, I just want to read a couple of comments that are in the feed. Stephen McMillan says, "Great stuff, Connor. Thank you. As a CNC machinist and CAD/CAM 3D printer nerd, I can appreciate the hard work that went into this. And then he goes on in another comment to say, interesting parallel between 3-axis CNC and sand casting. It will be interesting to study how the forms we see in the machine components will change over the next few decades as additive manufacturing becomes mainstream.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm glad that came up, because that's you know, I just briefly touched on it, but you know, that's something that I got really excited about is so like, just to explain it again for everyone, the original kind of cast iron parts likely would have been made through sand casting. So it's there's the form from above and a form from below that you mold around your object. You open it up, you take your original object out, you close it back up, and then you pour the molten metal in. So there's limitations on the forms. And in the same way that 3-axis CNC, it has the same limitations in the forms that it's able to create, traditionally anyways. And I think there's kind of a whole potential body of work exploring, kind of just diving into that itself. And yeah, I completely agree. I make use of my 3D printer for everything, but you know, for art created, but even for, you know, handles for tools, you know, for stacking. You know, I have little things to put all my drill bits in that are all 3D printed, and it happens so quickly, and it's so adaptive of the kind of the customized forms that you need. So yeah, so I'm pretty excited about that as well.
In regards to your creative process, where did your interest in using contemporary technologies such as computer design, 3D modeling, and digital fabrication in creating art begin?
Yeah, so it's kind of the skill. I've developed those skills for a long time. I remember, you know, in high school learning basic 3D modeling. And then I hadn't touched it for a long time. I had used it for, as I was just kind of mentioning, for problem solving, right? If I had an artwork that I needed to create a certain form, and maybe 3D printing was just the best way of doing it, then that's what I would use. But it wasn't really a kind of a core attribute of my artistic practice for a long time, until the pandemic started. In which case, you know, I couldn't access my studio, where I like to say, you know, or I can get dusty and make a mess. And I was at home in my bedroom, and I had to work off the computer. So a lot of my work shifted in a big way back to that technology and making use of that technology. And so for the last, I guess, 2.5 years now, it's been kind of right at the forefront of all of my making, and kind of the development of the projects that I choose to really focus on that, using that technology.
Well, on that note then, is this show part of your MFA thesis?
Yeah, so the machine work, I think, is the closest link to my thesis work, looking at fragments and reconstructing them kind of with as that speculative lens of historical fiction. So it's not trying to replicate what these things were originally, but trying to imagine what they could be, right? In the same way that a historical fiction in like a literary, like a book, it's, you know, real people, real events, real places, all tied together through kind of a imagined narrative, in the same way maybe a TV show or film would do in the same way, right? All of those period pieces, parts of those reference real things, other parts are completely kind of invented. So that's kind of what my thesis work is. So this exhibition was really great for expanding that research, still kind of staying in that realm of historical reconstruction, but allowing it to explore some other facets that aren't kind of quite within that that box that I've been focusing on.
Okay, could you describe how your experience working with this technology and as a sculptural artist?
Yeah, so it's I think there's a word kind of facture or the hand of the artist that I often kind of that comes up, right? It's are you losing the hand of the artist when you're distanced through the computer and, let's say, the 3D printer? I think I would kind of disagree wholeheartly with that idea, in that the way my hand, I think, can be seen in all of those steps, in the way that I create the models, in the way that I slice them up into layers that get sent out to the 3D printer, the way that they're handled and manipulated after the fact. I think those are all things that translate directly from kind of like traditional sculpture modes. But I think the exciting part for me is I get to draw from those traditional sculpture methodologies, but I also get to draw from industry, right? Mold making techniques that aren't necessarily, bronze casting for statues, things like that. Maybe it's plastic injection molding for toys, or vacuum forming for the lids of water bottles or something like that. That's all things that I think, from this kind of CAD CAM, computer aided design, computer aided manufacturing kind of point, that's all within my grasp and view as well.
Okay, the second part of that question was, what was the easiest part and what was the most difficult part of creating the works?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I think I guess one of the things that is a little bit of both of those is being away, right? As I mentioned in that talk, I'm not from Port Moody. This is not history that I'm very familiar with, that I've lived and breathed. Being that visitor, there is challenges with that, and literally being kind of physically away, even though, it's just a quick ferry ride and a few sky trains. That makes some things challenging, right? Like it wasn't until I was able to go to the museum and look at the collection that I could really get a good grasp on things that they had and where I got excited about that. But on the flip side of that, it also made other things easy, in that when I started this project, I hadn't become too deeply invested or committed to any part of Port Moody's history. Like one of the major things that through the initial research, how much the train and the rail line, how much that influenced Port Moody's history. But I think it was easy enough for me to be able to kind of step outside of that and look at maybe smaller little stories, little histories, without kind of being too overwhelmed by, I don't know, being in it too much, I guess.
So what was it that sparked your interest in looking into Port Moody's history?
Part of it was kind of the amazing opportunity that is the QM Choi scholarship. That really put Port Moody on the map for me. but in a strange kind of coincidence in looking at Port Moody's history, I had come across it once before in, I guess it would be my great uncle or one of my great great uncles, something along those lines. They invented some sort of propeller for yachts or boats and things. And coming from Ontario, originally all I knew is that it's somewhere near Vancouver, right? But you know, fairly recently I was looking into this history, and I thought I had found who it was and what it was, and out of Port Moody. And then, oh no, it's a little bit different. It was New Westminster. And so I was kind of tracking it all around, and then I realized I was on kind of the wrong track entirely. But it was an interesting coincidence that I had been digging into that history a little bit before.
Oh, that's kind of cool that you had come across it before this.
Yeah.
So what's next for your artistic practice?
Yeah, so I guess my thesis is taking up kind of the majority of my my artistic brain at the moment. And as I mentioned, I've got some really great fragments that I'm reconstructing. But looking forward, kind of within this vein of thinking of this historical reconstructions, I've been watching a great TV show called Time Team. It's out of the UK. It's all these archaeologists. They've got 3 days. They go in and dig a site and kind of dig through all the different layers of history that cut into each other, layer on top. It's, you know, does this stone belong to the Roman building there, or is it part of this Anglo-Saxon roundhouse or something? So there's a lot of imagination and debate and wondering. So I'd love to explore in artwork or a series of works that explore that kind of layering of history, and kind of the intersections and things like that. So I haven't figured it all out, but that's one of the things I'm starting to get excited about, I guess.
Yeah, it's kind of a lot of new things that you can move on to from this. I have one more question from Emily. She asks, how do you interpret your use of juxtaposition of the industrial and the natural within these objects and the rest of the exhibition?
Yeah, I got a really great comment about the cedar shingles, that the othering of time and place, in that cedar, you know, it has a history of its own, this natural history, that the other works don't necessarily have, right? They're newly created things, that whether it be that MDF being cut out or that plastic that the 3D printer's laying down. And there's something kind of really nice that I've been thinking a lot about that from that comment of, I guess maybe not, it's part of it is that it is the natural, but part of it is that there is making use of a material that has a pre-existing history. I guess in a way I'm kind of doing that with using these artifacts as kind of my source points, but it's not like I can, you know, take those things out of the museum's collection and start tampering with them and sawing them up and changing them. And I guess that's part of why I've gone with this 3D modeling route is once I do have that model, I can do a lot with it. I can manipulate it. I can slice it up. I can, you know, bend it, stretch it, scale it up. But I guess to answer that question, I think I much more favor the industrial. But there's something in the connection that we have to it, right? So it is this machine, but it doesn't have, I don't know how to say this, even like something like a handle on that machine gives us a connection to it. Those hammerheads, you know, for myself, and I hope for others, they could imagine putting those onto a hammer handle and understanding how awkward and strange that they would feel. So I guess there's a kind of connection there in there somewhere, but yeah.
I think that says it.
Great.
Well, thank you. There are Jillian McMillan. I think you met her at the opening reception, and she said I've so enjoyed hearing more about your ideas and technology. When we met at the opening, I knew I must listen to this talk. Thank you, Connor. It's so good that winning the Quiem Choi Award led to your appreciating Port Moody's history. So
absolutely.
yeah, you'll have to go have a look at their comments. There's
I will. I'll go straight there.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to explain more about my work and to create the exhibition and the whole bit. So thank you very much.
Well, I appreciate you being here. It's actually, if in past years we wouldn't have done an artist talk with you because you weren't able to be in the gallery. So here we go. The virtual artist talks are sometimes a nice thing to have. Thank you so much for being here, Connor, and for helping us with the video and the process presentation. It was a very interesting talk, and I know I really appreciated hearing it. I will say good night to our guests. Thank you for coming. We will have our next virtual artist talk, but not until July. So it'll be a while. We'll get back to you on when exactly it is. Thank you very much. I will say good night for now. Bye.